Compass Mining is your trusted partner in Bitcoin mining. Whether you're investing in one machine or thousands, our customizable solutions are tailored to meet your needs. We are your experts in Bitcoin mining, offering a platform where individuals and businesses can purchase hardware, host machines, and access a range of ancillary Bitcoin mining services. We also specialize in large-scale site development and data center operations. Discover more at compassmining.io and see how we can power your success today. Hey miners, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, the official home of power mining analysis. Bitcoin has pulled back, now trading sub $95,000. The miners are holding up relatively well so far during today's session. We're going to be talking about these market dynamics along with some recent news from Hive, Marathon, and specifically Soluna Holdings in today's podcast. Before we get into all that, please take a second, smash the like button, guys. Big help to myself and the channel. Anthony loves it. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join and let us know in the comment section below if you're currently holding any of these three companies, your outlook on the Bitcoin mining sector as a whole right now, how you're feeling about earnings so far here in Q1, and your outlook for the remainder of 2025. Now, with that being said, let's get into today's video. Okay, Anthony, Tuesday morning. Now, they say over here in North America, everything's bigger in Texas. I'm not sure about that, but we definitely are starting to see a theme in terms of Bitcoin mining activity in the state of Texas. That's going to be what we're talking about for the majority of today's podcast. We wanted to kick it off, though, with a couple of big interviews coming up next week. We're obviously on the road. You and I are heading out to New York City, the Big Apple, attending Bitcoin Investor Week, really headed off or kicked off by Anthony Pompliano, a big name in the space. So we're going to be in New York. However, continuing to do our regular podcasts and interviews. Next week on the docket, we've got Q4 coming out from both Riot Platforms and Bitdeer Technologies Group. Looking forward to those ones.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Texas, the sheer size of it. I think if they class Texas as a country, it would probably rank in the top 10 by GDP in terms of size. I know California certainly does. Texas would probably be one of the other states that would certainly. And it's the only state that has its own energy grid. It's outside of the rest of the US states who are part of the US grid, but it's got its own energy grid. And hence, probably why a lot of miners have gone down there. And if you think about the growth of miners have added a significant amount of energy to Texas, but in a positive way. Before you're jumping on me and saying that Bitcoin mining and it's bad. In Texas, actually, it's quite good because you've got a lot of renewable energy down there. You've got a lot of wind farms, a lot of solar, and the investment in wind farms and solar is very, very expensive. And before the Bitcoin miners arrived in Texas, it was taking something like 8 to 9 years to recover the cost of investment of a wind farm. And the reason it takes that long is they're never able to utilize all the power around the clock that they create with those renewable energy sources. Now that the Bitcoin mining's there, that return on investment period has come down to lower than 4 years for these businesses. So it's a very positive thing. And we've talked extensively about the miners being able to curtail as soon as the domestic requirement goes up there. That's continued. They are acting as good citizens in terms of that there, and they will use as much power as available when the demand is less. So it's a win-win for both the organization, for Texas, and for the people that live in those communities.
Yeah, most definitely is, Anthony. Now, speaking of Texas, I mentioned Riot interview next week. They've come out with some flashy new updates or slides on their Twitter account talking about January production results. So this is one of the big players in the space. We've been continuing to talk about Riot really since our initial trip to Corsicana way back last year. However, they're now eyeing up this HPC AI opportunity. That's going to be a focal point of our interview with Jason next week. We're also seeing a lot of activity in this West Texas area. As we start to hear about the Stargate investment from the US federal government, this West Texas opportunity seems to really be ripening for these companies, specifically Riot, who's got 600 megawatts of spare capacity at their Corsicana facility.
Absolutely. And, what a turnaround. 8 months ago, that 600 megawatts was all planned for Bitcoin mining. But, like any good leadership, they've looked at the market, they've looked at what's been happening in the market, and they have a site that's more developed than most of the other sites. When we look at other miners out there, who've been sort of trying to move into this space and given timelines, I think Riot, by announcing this 600 megawatts, might jump ahead of some of these other miners and be in a position to have a client a lot quicker. Now, we know that big hyperscalers are looking sort of like 3 to 5 years ahead. So, that might be the case too, as well, for those that are going to take 3 to 5 years to create their facilities and readiness for HPC. But having somebody ready to do it, literally maybe in the next year, 18 months, because they've literally done all the groundworks at Corsicana. We were very fortunate to go there last year. So it's the largest Bitcoin mining site in the world. It's actually now overtaken the second largest mining site, which was the Rockdale facility, in terms of hash rate. So in the month of January, they were able to achieve over 15 exahash of energized hash rate at Corsicana, whilst maintaining 15 exahash at the Rockdale facility. So, and rightly so, Riot, we've been talking about them, for a long period now, and we used to hold our head in our hands at some of the updates that were coming out because they just weren't able to get anywhere near the expectation of Bitcoin mined with the amount of energy and machines they had switched on. And finally, Jason came out and explained the reason why, with regards to some of the batches of their machines that weren't operating anywhere near where they should be. That's probably helped a little bit in the understanding of this. Not the only mine. Look at the, Bitfarms in recent months have also had that issue. But what we've seen from Riot in the last sort of 5 or 6 months, we've seen this general improvement month after month. Big strides to get more and more of that energized hash rate operating or utilized more fully than it was previously. So we saw, literally 1 or 2 exahash every month being added to their operational, their average hash rate month by month. And that's really helped in them achieving, a good set of results for January, and pretty much in that sort of that top 3 miners across all the metrics. So, that was a nice position to be in January, and hopefully they can maintain that throughout the rest of the year. We've seen miners come along and do that marathon we've had, go back to December 2023 when they were mining 1,850 Bitcoin. And, the following month it went down to 1,200. So, it's great having 1 month, but you want to make sure there's some consistency in that. And yes, people allow for, like, when there's weather issues that cause curtailment, but that will affect most of the miners when you're thinking about they're all operating in North America, and the weather, can be challenging across the whole space there. We saw that in January to a certain extent, with utilization being a little bit lower than it was in December across the board, not just one miner, but across the board. And I was on a Spaces meeting last night with a miner who was actually having a discussion about this. And yes, they had to switch off, quite a few times during the month of January because weather conditions were so bad. And also, when weather conditions are bad, it means that the demand for energy also is higher because people want to keep themselves warm, in that environment, and therefore the domestic requirement goes up. And miners are always, happy to switch off to make sure that the domestic requirement is always met.
Yeah, they certainly are. And it's great you bring up some of those partnership community opportunities with these miners, really able to be good stewards or members of the communities they partner with. Now, we've obviously got a lot to talk with Jason and team about next week. The other big interview we have, also Q4 earnings, is Bitdeer Technologies. So we talk about the pipeline that Riot has within their portfolio. We'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the pipeline Bitdeer brings to the table.
Absolutely. Probably one of the largest pipelines of all the miners when you look at what they're actively pursuing in terms of these aren't sites that are, for the long-term future. A lot of these sites for that pipeline, over 2.5 gigawatts, they're actually in progressing now, and some of these start coming online during the next few quarters. So the likes of facilities in Norway, Bhutan, they've got two or three big facilities in the US as well that are already well under the progress there. And, this is a lot of hash rate coming out this year. If you remember when we had, Jeff was on the podcast, and even going back to when we had Harris on the podcast there, their plan was to get a significant amount of hash rate in 2025 as these sites were starting to become ready for energization. And the news also that they're producing their own miners now was obviously a great lift to them and to the market in particular. And not many shares have progressed in the last sort of 3 or 4 months, as well as Bitdeer in terms of that growth spurt that we've seen. And so, they're going to have potentially a sizable increase this year, maybe something like what we saw IREN do in 2024 when they went from 6 exahash to 31. If Bitdeer achieve their target, which I think is well over 30 exahash, they'll have gone from, I think it was 8.7 in January, all the way up to, close to 40. That could be 25 to 30 exahash achieved just in the calendar year. And that puts them firmly in that top tier, along with the likes of Riot, Marathon, CleanSpark, and IREN.
Most definitely. So looking very forward to those discussions, you guys. We've also done some great updates on our website, powermininganalysis.com. You can actually go in and take a look at all of the individual miner metrics, pages, images, leadership team, sites of operation we've even got in there, and recent news. So we talked about Yahoo banning some of the news feeds for the miners, Bitcoin specific companies. We've found a workaround for that. So make sure you guys go in, take a look. Here's an example of what the Riot and Bitdeer pages look like, but a great resource as you're doing your due diligence. Now, a couple other headlines here, Anthony. One, again, on this Texas theme, one not. This morning, the Business and Commerce Committee is hearing the SB 21 bill, so very fitting here. 21 million Bitcoin, SB 21 is the bill's name. If passed and signed into law, would make Texas the first state to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. This was posted by Charles Schwertner this morning, who actually put this bill into motion. Now, if you fast forward, they're currently listening to this bill live. The Texas State Senate hearing the creation of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. This is another massive step, not only for the state of Texas, but we're now really seeing this race or jockeying between states to be the first one to implement an SBR at their local state level.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked again about the amount of states that are pursuing this strategic Bitcoin reserve as part of their own benefit as well. So, at the last count, it was probably over 20 states were actively pursuing this and had already gone through the first or second iteration of the process. This obviously takes Texas towards the end. And bear in mind, when you think about Bitcoin mining specifically, the great majority of Bitcoin mining in North America is actually happening in Texas. So it's a thumbs up to that there. It is starting to become the Bitcoin state of the US, and maybe even of the world, in terms of especially the mining. But this is a very, very good positive news story. There are a number of other states also actively trying to get to this position. And there's a couple of states that have sort of said no, and I think Wyoming and North Dakota, I seem to remember from last week's podcast, they already have said no at the second reading, which means it doesn't advance now in the near future in those two states. But this is good news today, not just for Texas, but for Bitcoin itself.
Yeah, great to see the developments at a political level, and we're going to come on to some of the infrastructure updates or miner specific updates in Texas as well. Now, the next story here, Anthony, related to SBF, not to be confused with the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. This one's FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried, talking about the distributions or repayments from people impacted with the FTX exchange collapse. Now, this is estimated to be in the neighborhood of about $18 billion. many of which are presumed to flow right back into Bitcoin or crypto as these people finally get access to their money. They can now redeploy that. I can only imagine. I was looking at some of the distributions. They segmented it either below or above $50,000 US. I can only imagine if you had that much exposure in a single exchange way back in the day, Anthony. However, this money coming back into the market expected to be very bullish for Bitcoin price itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks like most people are going to get back what they put into that fund initially. So, the appreciation of the assets that were taken from SBF during that process before he was, when he was convicted and jailed, those assets have appreciated, and now it gives them a sum, I think, to cover most of the creditors. So the expectation is of that, I think it's about 16 billion in terms of repayments. A good slice of that could coming straight back in there. And the fact that it's appreciated over the last couple of years shows that there's a benefit of keeping your money in Bitcoin and not selling it. So yeah, let's see how that works out.
Now we talk about the price of Bitcoin responding to these inflows. Right now doesn't seem to be the case, Anthony. Bitcoin hovering in the $94,200 range. The Bitcoin miners holding up okay, relatively speaking, but for the most part in the red in the sector this morning.
Yeah, Bitcoin pulled back a little bit today. It's been a bit, yo-yoing between that 95, 97,000 range, but now it's dipped below 95. I don't know what the technical analysts are thinking at the moment. I know Freedom by 40, one of our friends, had put out a tweet recently to suggest that, Bitcoin could go up to 150 in May, looking at the way it had been progressing over the last month or so. So time will tell. But yeah, a little bit of a dip today. The mining stocks, some of them are still green actually at the moment. We've noticed IREN is was certainly in positive territory, along with the likes of Core Scientific, Cypher, and you start thinking about these stocks here. These are stocks that have got HPC intentions as well as the Bitcoin mining. So when we've said before about the mining stock starting to correlate to Bitcoin when the price of Bitcoin drops, the one company that wasn't falling as quickly as it was always Core Scientific, because when they start receiving the revenues from that 8.7 billion contract that we keep referring to, that's not correlated to Bitcoin. That's going to happen. That $550 million per year in net profit is going to happen starting 2025. The profit in 2025 and 2026 and part of 2027 will be reduced because they're borrowing a significant amount to develop these sites, and therefore they're going to pay the capital back out of the receipts that they're going to receive, but only up to a maximum of about 30% of their revenues that they can take that away. So it's spread over a couple of years. I mean, that's a great deal when you're getting that type of investment to do what you're going to do to those sites to get them ready for that contract to start. And if you think about that figure, $550 million net profit per annum once those payments have been repaid. So effectively, the last 10 years of the contract, they're going to be earning 80% net profit, which is 550 million. We talked about the last quarter for the likes of IREN from a mining perspective. They achieved 18.9 million for a quarter. If that was to be annualized for a whole year, you're looking at 76, 77 million in net profit from a mining business compared to 550 million from a HPC investment, with effectively the same amount of power being used. So we know that IREN have 510 megawatts of power. The amount of HPC power that Core Scientific are managing is about 500 megawatts. And yes, there'll be an extra 100 megawatts of ancillary power to support that. But you could argue very quickly there, 500 megawatts of that business compared to the mining business. Now, if the Bitcoin price rallies to the 150 that Freedom suggests it might in May, then that will obviously give the likes of IREN a significant more. They've achieved 18.9 million based on an average Bitcoin price of $84,000. So if it goes to 150, that's nearly getting on for double that amount. And bear in mind, it's only the energy cost that will increase as more Bitcoin is produced. It's not the operating costs or the, like staffing. That's pretty much fixed. So the margins do improve for miners, but the Bitcoin price has to really rally to do that. But it would have to rally significantly higher than 150,000 to be anywhere close to getting to what Core Scientific are doing. Hence why Danny's very keen to start, utilizing his power at the Childress site and at the Sweetwater sites 1 and 2 for HPC going forward. And the same reason that Jason has also done a 180 turn on Corsicana and now fully putting that 600 megawatts to use should the right client turn up. I mean, they've even turned around and said, they've took away their Bitcoin mining hash rate target, which suggests, all cards on the table, it's going to be HPC. And they must have had a significant number of calls and chats to make that decision before, really looking at what the landscape was for HPC in the Corsicana area.
Compass Mining makes Bitcoin mining accessible to everyone. Start mining in as little as 48 hours with our turnkey hardware, online and mining directly to your Bitcoin wallet within 2 business days. Find out more at compassmining.io and get started now. Yeah, it's a good update and such a tremendous amount of focus right now on this AI HPC vertical. And that's exactly why, Anthony, it's just so lucrative. The next story we wanted to talk about as we get into the individual miners here has both a connection to Texas and HPC. Hive Digital Technologies, they recently relocated their head office to San Antonio, where Frank Holmes, the executive chair, is based. They just came out with a big press release today talking about the addition of Craig Tavares as the president and chief operating officer as their new division, Buzz HPC, which is the first time I've actually seen this made reference to in a press release, talking about them really taking a step into this HPC GPU cloud service vertical.
Yeah, I mean, it's another addition to the company. So this guy's got a lot of experience in this particular area, and that's why Hive have identified the requirement for those skill sets to be part of the management team at Hive. Bear in mind, Hive have been, involved in HPC, on a reasonable scale, not quite the scale that Bit Digital have, but in a somewhat similar way to what IREN have been doing over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. Bear in mind, Hive sort of had the jump on everybody else because they had all those GPUs that they were using for Ethereum mining, and they had to find a real use for that GPU power. They did initially try to mine some altcoins, and then they realized actually that the long-term benefit would be to move across to HPC. And once they started to announce that and start to announce a strategy, that's when the change occurred. And so we're now sort of like 18 months down the line. Their annualized revenue in HPC is about 15 million. So slightly higher than IREN's at the moment, but still a significant amount lower than Bit Digital, who are fast getting towards their 100 million of annualized revenue imminently, as Sam suggested on the previous podcast. But Hive have got high hopes for HPC. They hope to get to 20 million annualized revenue at the end of Q1, and they have an aspiration to get to 100 million by the end of 2025. That alongside their massive growth in the Bitcoin mining industry, which they're going to grow from 6 exahash, which they're currently operating at, to 25 exahash once these sites are energized in Paraguay. That's the 2 sites, the site they've purchased from Bitfarms and the site they were developing previous to that purchase. So, a significant amount of power down there, 300 megawatts of power for Bitcoin mining, 19 exahash coming online by the end of September. So that's an IREN type, that's an IREN stroke CleanSpark type of performance required that they achieve in 2024 for Hive to achieve in 2025. And we're paying close attention to how they continue with that strategy, because they will be energizing machines between now and September as each building is completed and energized. In the same way that we saw Riot do from the likes of April last year when building A was energized and we were there when building B was energized and building C and D were then being built ready for the completion, which they've done now. They've completed all their 400 megawatts at Corsicana. So great update today for Hive Digital. Another key member to the team there. Hopefully this is going to drive and show the market that they are serious about the HPC.
Most definitely, and a very active start to 2025 for the team at Hive Digital Technologies. Now, the next one, sticking with our Texas theme here, Anthony, Marathon Holdings, or Mara, has now announced the closing of their Texas Windfarm acquisition. This news came out a while back. We talked about it on the channel as it relates to Trump's thoughts or focus on wind power generation versus oil and gas. He's obviously not the biggest fan of wind farms or this form of reusable energy. However, as you said, Anthony, Bitcoin miners in a unique position to partner up with these facilities, or in the case of Mara, purchase them outright and take advantage of that stranded renewable power.
Yeah, it's a good update from Marathon. I mean, we've talked extensively about how we felt the asset light strategy they implemented, 3 or 4 years ago has not been working as well in terms of their monthly operational updates. I mean, we already mentioned during this podcast, they have some good months, but when they have a good month, it's usually 5 or 6 months before the next good month. And, you want consistency. There are a number of miners out there that put out good, consistent updates. And we've just talked about Hive Digital. They're one of those miners every month over the last 4 years. They've pretty much been in the top two. Sometimes they've ventured down into the top three, but consistent performer every month in, month out. And this is something that Marathon haven't done. Now, we've talked about the reasons for that. And when you're a host, your miners are hosted by another facility. The challenge then is it's about control, about curtailment, about maintenance. Don't underestimate the amount of maintenance these mining machines from any of the miners, from any of the sites require. We were down in Denton, as I say, back in June last year, and we took a visit around their repair centre. And in the first sort of 5.5 months of June, there'd already been at that site something like 11,000 work orders for machines to get fixed. Now, some of these could be very, very quick. It could be changing a part. Some of them could be a little bit more extensive. The majority of them were done on site, which helps the likes of Core Scientific get those machines back running, in a fairly quick. But 11,000 work orders in that first 5.5 months suggests that these machines, because they're working 24/7, do require a lot of love and attention at the sites. And that's something that Marathon couldn't control. Now they've started to buy up sites. We've seen the last year or so, they've now got, I think it's getting close to 60% of their total mining fleet is within their own facilities. Fred did want that to get to 80% by the end of 2024. That wasn't achieved there. But this is a nice step forward in terms of completing that vertical integration, having the power assets now to go with the fact they've got their own facilities, their miners, and so fully vertical integrated. It's a good site with 240 megawatts of interconnection capacity and 140 megawatts of nameplate wind capacity. So they have the benefit there. We talked already about some of these wind farms are just not able to utilize all the energy they're producing. I'm more than certain that Marathon will be making every effort to utilize every available amount of excess energy at that particular facility.
Most definitely. And it's interesting to see companies like Gryphon and Bitdeer coming up north to Canada, partnering or purchasing these oil and gas facilities to achieve their true vertical integration. And then on the other side of the coin, or the other end of the continent here, we've got Marathon And the next company we're going to talk about, Soluna Holdings, going after the renewable wind farm approach. Now, I just made reference to Soluna. They came out with a big press release today, Anthony, talking about Project Kati successfully exiting their ERCOT planning phase. Now, like we talked about in the intro, Texas is unique because of this ERCOT body. This is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, and this marks a major step, opening up really a lot of opportunity for this site and development for John and the team at Soluna.
Yeah, we've been talking about Project Kati and going through this process of getting the applications through ERCOT, and now that they've successfully exited that process, they can now get up now and start delivering this project. It's 166 megawatts of renewable energy, and it'll be done in two phases, 83 megawatts for each phase. And this Project Kati is twofold. It's looking at obviously Bitcoin mining from a hosting perspective, and also utilizing some of that power for HPC AI activities, like the great majority of other miners. Now, they were talking like a long time before some of the miners that have come out now and said they're moving that way before Riot changed their mind. So this is a great tick in the box for John and the team at Soluna. This is a company that's only valued, literally just over $20 million, but they just seem to be punching a little bit above their weight in terms of these types of projects. They were starting off with, some smaller projects like the Dorothy 1, and then they graduated to the Dorothy 2, getting bigger and bigger. This one here, this is a big project, 166 megawatts. Don't underestimate that there. Just to put it into context, 166 megawatts. Hive are operating 6 exahash using about 124 megawatts of power. So this is a significant amount of power for sites. And when you look at high performance computing, think about TeraWulf's. They're utilizing, I think it's something like 70 megawatts of power at Lake Mariner to deliver 60 megawatts of high performance compute. And if this particular site here delivers 83 megawatts of AI and HPC opportunities, that's as big as a deal, or even bigger than the one that TeraWulf is currently getting ready for their host client coming in from the Middle East.
Most definitely. Yeah, another theme of today's video, this HPC opportunity. And as we start to see more and more deals come to fruition, the margins and the return on these investments or the infrastructure build outs is just quite impressive here, Anthony. So as we round out the podcast, I'm just looking at the price of Bitcoin now dropping into the $93,000 range, just slightly below that $94,000 threshold. It's going to be an interesting remainder of the day. The miners are starting to unfortunately pull back following the price of Bitcoin. So I'll give you a final word here, Anthony, but more volatility to start off the trading week here.
Yeah, it certainly looks like the miners are correlated with this drop in the Bitcoin price now. So all the miners effectively in the red. Core Scientific and Cypher at the moment, their share prices are just about holding the line, but no increase, literally holding flat as to where they were at the Friday close. But yeah, we're seeing miners now like Bitdeer we spoke about today. They're down 7%, Riot down 6%, Marathon down 5%. So some of the biggest market capitalizations, and in the mine space are having a bit of a pullback today. So, but tomorrow's, another day, and in Bitcoin land, things can turn around really quickly. We're still waiting for, a negative news story about Bitcoin. Every time we come on the channel, there's always a lot more positive news stories out there in terms of, supporting Bitcoin. You mentioned today about, Texas taking its step forward to, be the first state to achieve the strategic Bitcoin reserve that even Donald Trump at the country level wants, or the national level wants to achieve. So, everything is very positive around Bitcoin. Bitcoin will do what Bitcoin does, but I'm sure we'll see, a rebound shortly.
Yeah, and with all these recent 13F filings, Anthony, seeing the amount of Bitcoin ETF that's being held on corporate balance sheets, I'm getting more and more confident with this trade. In addition to that, we're seeing the institutional ownership in the Bitcoin miners continuing to climb, now over 60% for CleanSpark. So I tend to think days like this, they're continuing to look to shake out retail. However, if you've got the conviction, the long-term outlook, and that fundamental investment style, Anthony, as we do here, the buy and hold style, just gives us an opportunity to accumulate lower for longer. So with that being said, you guys let us know what you're doing today in your account, your thoughts on these pieces of news in relation to Hive, Marathon, and Soluna. And with that being said, we'll see you back here tomorrow.